Hi, classmates. Rick, Jamal, and I read Indebted, How Families Make College Work at Any Cost by Caitlin Zaloom. It was published by the Princeton University Press in 2019.
So Zaloom's main point is this. The federal government, banks, and institutions of higher education work in concert, creating what Zaloom refers to as the student finance complex, to furnish families with tools to financially secure their children a college education. However, these federal, social, and academic institutions make these tools available based on assumptions of the family unit, thereby privileging the previously wealthy and well-connected families. Deviating from these institutional assumptions invites punishment, which manifests in the accruement of greater debt and/or the barring of equal access to aid resources. Now, this is clearly not exhaustive, right? It's a main point, but what I tried to get across in writing this was the apparatus that exists in the world when it comes to penetrating higher education and what how that complex arrived at the tools and the help and the guides that it seeks to provide, and what happens when that doesn't work out. So I tried to get the entire trajectory, and what we end up with is the complex of the student finance complex and the tools that they provide, which Zaloom looks at in several subsequent chapters after the introduction. And therein, what happens to families who either can't or who have to make what I put in here as deviations from those plans that the student finance complex can't seem to account for. So that's why I wrote it this way.
So I selected this first quote. It's very succinct, but I think Zaloom makes a great point here. Debt is a tool of social power. Debt, according to Zaloom, dictates the types of jobs that we take after we graduate from school. It also dictates the types of jobs that our parents, who share the burden of the cost of education oftentimes, will pursue. It also sometimes influences when our parents are even able to retire. Lenders hold the power over the receiver of loans. They are the ones that make the rules.
I chose these next two quotes particularly because of the tie that Zaloom makes between financial matters and morality or cultural moral mandates. Those were very interesting to me because they're embedded, they're often inarticulated, and extremely powerful. So the first one is this: the transformation in the national project of funding college education involves deep changes of political morality written in financial terms. See there very starkly with the emphasis added. This is the system that we're looking at, the mixture of political morality, extremely loaded term, written in financial terms. So two very different things, or things that should be disparate, that are mixed together, creating a great deal of tension and in some instances an impossibility to succeed in the system that exists as it is. And the second is much like it. The moral strictures of these technologies are not spelled out explicitly, but they derive most of their power from the fact that they remain unstated. We talked a lot about masking hegemony here, and particularly the inarticulated, unspoken nature of these assumptions are what give them the most power.
And for me, the quote I chose, two quotes: financial assistance is linked to a family's wealth, income, and spending. Government and universities alike oblige parents to contribute funds, and signing them to payments often so hefty that it binds them to their children for many years and past graduations. And in the book, Zaloom talks about how students and children almost have to trade their independence, which many folks associated the college going experience to be, to still be very much so dependent on their families' contributions in order to navigate that. But then for the families, they now then are responsible for making payments for something that may last them a lot longer than that education system. And so it really reiterates what Rick mentioned in the main points, just how the student financial complex really does show up and really puts both the parents and the children in debt collectively. But I think the next quote really shows the inspiration of why people still are committed to going in debt for the sake of going to higher education. As an organizing value of middle-class family life, potential holds a sacred place. It must be held apart from the prosaic matters of finance and cannot be reduced to economic value. And so even despite how much it may cost families for their children to go to college, what motivates and seems to motivate a lot of the examples in the book and the families in the book was this idea of potential, which I think really ties into what we've been talking about in class with the idea of credentialism, right? That the potential to achieve more motivates people to pursue higher education, even despite the financial setbacks and challenges that it may bring.
I wrote the first lesson here, and I wish I could have learned a more uplifting lesson. But the lesson that I learned was that the tools or the forms, as you see in the last sentence of the first blurb there, forms can't define or account for family fluidity and dynamics. It is a very complex world out there, and unfortunately, the student financial complex can't account for it. So families can't rely on the tools that it provides. So it brings me back to not necessarily a declarative lesson learned, but a question that I'm prompted to ask, which is this worth it?
I have the second lesson here. As students approach college, they are simultaneously striving for independence while dependent upon their families for financial assistance. This enmeshed autonomy, Zaloom's concept there, burdens families financially. Additionally, it entangles children in the complicated and often private financial situations of their parents. A lot of times, parental finances are very private from their children. And because of the requirements from the FAFSA application, in order for students to qualify for federal and state financial aid, they must complete this form with their parents' financial information. And so these students are very much reliant upon their families. And this is different than other countries, as Zaloom covers, where they are independent going into college without any financial information from their parents required. So the United States system is incredibly challenging for many students who, like Rick has said, do not come from that traditional household where they may have their parents' information handy and ready to go.
And for the final lesson, for me, pursuing higher education for middle-class families and beyond requires an understanding of the entanglement of finances, backgrounds, history, access, and should include equitable information and resources. And so for me, this was both a lesson learned from the book, but also a reminder of our role within higher education, particularly on the student affairs side, to make sure that we are equipping college-going families with the right amount of information and access to truly make informed decisions of attending and matriculating through college. And so with this student finance complex being really real for many families, both middle class families and beyond, this student complex will always exist. And so we definitely have to make sure that we are actively working to make understandings around finances more equitable. And to wrap us up, we thank you all for listening to us. This was a great book and a quick read. And so we encourage you all to take some time and read this book on your own time because it really does shape how we do this work in higher education. Thank you.